Hi, this is Larry Bauer, Chief Executive Officer of the Family Medicine Education Consortium, and I'm really pleased to be talking with another Larry today. We used to jokingly, I was East Coast Larry, and Dr. Larry Helverson was Midwest Larry. Larry is a retired family physician now who was program director for the Cox Family Medicine Residency Program for 18 years. Larry, thank you for joining in.
Thanks for having me, Larry.
So let's get a little background about you. Where did you go to medical school? Where to residency program, that sort of thing?
I went to the University of Oklahoma Medical School in Oklahoma City, and I did my residency at the University of Missouri-Columbia under Jack Caldwell.
Wow, that's quite a, Jack is, he's just an amazing guy. And what a program, one of the strongest programs in the country, continuing up to the present.
Yeah, I was very lucky. I was in the second full class that was a residency class that in the program that was started there. And I met a lot of amazing family doctors over the years from that program.
So you decided to write a book about is it fair to say that he was a childhood idol?
Absolutely, he was more than an idol. He was everything to me. He was an idol, a mentor, an inspiration, and a very, very interesting fellow.
So why don't you show folks a copy of the book so they'll see what it looks like?
Now, this is my my mentor, Dr. Richard Steele Buker Jr., MD.
Maybe you could you go ahead and you can set that down now. So choosing a title like Windblown,
yes,
that's a pretty evocative title. Let's start right there. Just so, what was it that that led you to choose a title like that for your book?
Well, I thought about just naming it his name, but when he was in college, he earned a nickname. They called him Windblown because his hair was never combed. He was always out in the wilderness doing something. He was always a little bit disheveled. When he moved to Montana, where I grew up, the wind howls on the upper Midwestern prairie, and he was always out in it, out in the wind, out in the snow, out in the rain or whatever. But wind was the dominant atmospherical feature of northern Montana.
And how did you come into his life? How did he come into your life?
Well, in the winter of 1956, Dr. Richard Buker made a house call. I was among 5 siblings. 3 of us were sick. I wasn't, but 3 of my siblings were sick. My parents were worried sick. And then late at night, this man, kind of a disheveled looking wind-blown man, came trudging through sort of mid-calf deep snow on our driveway. We were in a rented home, and knocked on the door. My parents let him in, and the moment he came in, my parents breathed a sigh of relief. They knew they were going to be okay. They were raising children at a time. They remembered a lot of children died of fevers when they were young. So this man came in and laid down his bag and started examining us and talking to my parents. And there's aspects of that conversation that I'll never forget.
So when did you first recognize that Dr. Buker was a special man?
Well, it was right then. I mean, my father said, boy, there's a man that knows something. There's a man that cares. There's a man that goes out of his way for others. And he said, boys, if you want to be like somebody, be like Dr. Buker.
So that was how old were you at the time?
I was 8. He moved to town when I was 6. I knew of him before that house call, but when the house call came, that's when I recognized that that was somebody that I wanted to be like.
Why don't you describe for people what was he like?
He was a little bit of he was short. He was a little bit hunched. He had a clipped voice. People from New England did not move to Chester, Montana very often, so it was a little bit difficult for us to understand him. But he spoke rapidly, but assuredly, and he laughed. He had a sense of humor. He was so confident. My parents just knew that things were going to be okay after he came to see us.
So when I read the book, I was blown away. He is one of those uh, intense, probably brilliant, very self-confident, and just the kind of physician, especially in a I think a very frontier kind of part of the country, that would inspire confidence. And it sounded like, based on what you described in the book, I mean, his scope of practice was pretty amazing. Can you talk about that?
Oh yes, yeah. It's a little bit of an issue of whether he tried to do too much, but he did everything. He did everything. He looked upon this town, this region. It really became a region that were his patients. And if there was a problem, he could handle it. He would handle it, and he did handle it. He did refer some patients out, but not as often as we can even imagine. I mean, he did surgeries that were difficult. He did orthopedics that was difficult. He did incredibly difficult obstetrical procedures, but he did it well. He did them very well.
So, as a physician, what was it? You mentioned that he was a role model and a mentor. What was it about him that that inspired you?
Well, he was so knowledgeable. He was brilliant, but he really inspired not just me as a doctor. He inspired a pianist. He inspired a chemical biologist. He inspired us to get an education. We grew up in an area where not most of us were not going to be able to stay there and be farmers, and he became a member of the school board. He really helped elevate education in the area for the whole region. But people wanted to spend a little time with him because you could ask him about anything. He knew so much about everything, especially nature and art and music and history and medicine, of course. He was a polymath, as one of my friends put it. He just loved learning. He had an insatiable curiosity, and he would people sitting around the coffee shop in town. Someone would come up and somebody say, "I don't know what that is," and somebody says, "Ask Buker." Ask Buker became a sort of a common phrase in our little town.
So you've chosen a lot of different stories. Obviously, you didn't tell all the stories. I was impressed actually with you must have worked very long and hard to collect all the stories from even before your possible memory was formed. But could give us an idea about his love of nature. You described some pretty wild adventures.
Well, the guy never thought anything was impossible, and he was one of these people that observed everything. He could walk down the street. He was looking at birds in the sky. He was looking at tracks of animals. He was always paying attention to nature. He knew what kind of plants grew and which one were edible and which one had some vitamin C in it. He just couldn't stop learning about nature, and it it was the thing that I think gave him resilience. It's like he got tired, and he had some difficulties. He had some failures. He had some self-doubts, but getting out into nature was a thing that just solved everything for him. I'm sure that he tramped more feet of Liberty County, the county that I grew up in, than any person who's ever lived there, with the possible exception of the Plains Indians. He went all over and saw all kinds of things that other people had never noticed.
You told some stories in the book that sounds like it was more than risk taking. It was, mere mortals would not dare. Could you give us an example of one of his wild and crazy ideas?
Well, there's so many, but let me choose one. That his best friend Gary Jensen and he were parked on the top of a dam, damming the Marias River, on New Year's Day in 1964, 65. I have to look at the book to be sure. It was 20 degrees below zero and the wind was howling, and they were hunting for ducks. There's a tunnel under that dam that runs all the time. So water's flowing very rapidly through the tunnel. And Buker said, let's hike down to that tunnel. We're going to find some ducks. We're going to find some ducks on the water. And there's steam coming off of the tunnel water, so they couldn't see down there. But they hiked all the way down there, and bang, Buker shot a duck. And it landed in the water. And in Buker went. He would never, ever leave an animal. Now, he was an avid hunter, and I was not an avid hunter, but he would never leave an animal that he shot that he wouldn't somehow consume, eat, or skin, or whatever. He used the animals that he shot. Well, it's 20 below, and he's soaking wet. He gets out of the water, and they've got a hike of 50 meters up this dam where the car's parked, and his clothes freeze. He can't bend his knees, so he's waddling up this dam, which made it extremely hard to climb all the way to the top, and did not drop his duck. Got to the top of the dam, and the car wouldn't start. And every year in north central Montana, somebody freezes freezes to death in a similar situation. Gary had a can of heat, which is a flammable hydrocarbon used up there a lot, that he poured in. He opened up the radiator. He got the hood open through his freezing fingers, poured the heat into the radiator, and turned it over one more time, and it started. There would have been no car coming by. It was New Year's Day, and everybody in Montana, except Buker and Jensen, were drinking on New Year's Eve and weren't getting up at all in the morning until the football game started. They were down there hunting. So that was just one example, and there were several others.
You made decisions about stories and legends, that you put in the book. What criteria did you use to try to help the reader understand the inner workings of this man?
Well, some of it was just serendipity, that I ran into an old friend who said, let me tell you a story about Buker. And it was one I hadn't heard before oftentimes. And on the other hand, I searched for some stories, because I knew parts of the story. They were iconic. Everybody knew the story. And I searched for some stories that I wanted to illustrate some of the special features of Buker that endeared us to him so. But honestly, the biggest criticism I get from my hometown area is, why didn't you ask me? I got a dozen Buker stories better than the ones that you wrote.
That is really great. So he, as I recall from your book, as he got older, much older, he began to struggle some.
He did.
Maybe he wasn't so comfortable admitting it, but it became somewhat of an issue. Could you speak to that period of his life?
Yes, I could. When Richard was younger and I was a medical student and resident, I would go up and spend some time with him. And his father was practicing with him for a while, and his father was not doing well, was losing some of his competence, and this had become very difficult for Richard to deal with. And he told me at that time, don't ever let me practice beyond my capabilities. If I need to stop, I need you to tell me. Well, I didn't join him in practice for all kinds of reasons I won't get into. I stayed here in Missouri and he was in Montana. I talked with him a lot, interacted with him a lot, but I wasn't there to see his day-to-day activities. But what happened was he became a little bit dangerous. And one of his younger colleagues had to deal with it, had to really force his retirement. And people said, well, why'd you put that in the book? And I said, because actually I got an email just a little while ago from one of my former residents who wants to stop doing hospital practice, but he feels a little guilty about it. And I said, Jason, don't feel guilty. If you finish reading the book, he was only halfway through the book, you'll find that Buker practiced too long. And a lot of us do. We have to recognize that life is finite, our skills will deteriorate, and as great as he was, he could have hurt somebody, and it would have been such a tragedy. And I was in such admiration of his younger colleague who did what she had to do to help him retire. Not everybody in town understands that. Some people never forgave her. Some of his family members never forgave her. But I've been there. I've done that. And I know how hard it is. And I know that's what we have to do as family doctors. We have to help each other sometimes to retire.
You were critical in the book of his diagnosis and treatment of prostate cancer. Could you comment on that?
I made that step because when I first knew Richard Buker, he knew everything about everything. And for so many years, I could never find something that I knew that he didn't know. But he kind of lost touch with the academic side of medicine as he got late into his career. And this was at a time when the U.S. Preventative Services Task Force was telling us, do not do a PSA. It's a bad choice. People end up getting treatment for a disease that'll never kill them. Well, Buker had a PSA done and started taking treatments for prostate cancer. And I think obviously it didn't kill him. And people think, well, it's because he got treated. But honestly, the treatment gave him lots and lots of complications. He suffered from that. And I mean, that's when I first recognized that, this brilliant man has lost some of his brilliance as he got older, and we all need to realize that. We all need to deal with that.
As you look at his life, and you clearly talk to a lot of people who practiced with him or nurses who supported him, what's your sense of his understanding of health and healing?
Well, I think that Richard, early in his life, was strictly a biomedical doctor. But being a part of a community for a long period of time, he started recognizing the importance of personal relationships with his patients. And I mean, he always cared about us. He always knew what we were doing and all that sort of thing. But he recognized it has a healing impact. Abiding with people. He was always there when they were sick. He was always there when they were dying. He was always there with the family. And I think, he understood that behavior has a lot to do with health, and relationship has a lot to do with behavior, and abiding has a lot to do with almost a spiritual power of healing. He was a good biomedical doctor, but as he grew as a doctor, he became better and better as a broad-based, multiple skills doctor.
So, Larry, I know that one of your passions, all the while that I've known you, was to strengthen family medicine. Obviously, as a residency director, you were influential with over 18 years, quite a number of young family physicians. Why do you think this story might be beneficial to people in family medicine and advocates for family medicine?
Well, I think we all have the experience that that there's history to everything we do. There's a history to family medicine, and that history becomes more important to me as I grow older. And understanding where Richard Buker came from, I feel like he was sort of the link between some pretty poorly trained bone crushers, they used to call them, you know, frontier doctors, and what I consider residency trained, highly evidence-based medicine, enthusiastic, understanding the broad ways in which you can help people improve their health. I think he bridged that gap. He was there for the transition. He was a general practitioner, became a family doctor. He was a guy who did a lot of surgery before the time that family doctors don't do very much surgery anymore. But he paved the way for us to understand health in a different way and to understand that education and competence are extremely important. And he inspired me to be an educator.
Well, I have to say that reading the book, I'm also interested in the history of medicine and history of family medicine. And reading the book helped me to put into perspective those very early years, actually before even family medicine was a specialty. And those people who chose general practice back then, they were pioneers.
Yes.
And they did most of their learning on the job, because most of them only had 1 year after medical school, and then they went into a community, and if they were lucky, a lot of times they didn't join a practice even, they just started their own practice. So it was a lot of self-directed learning, and it's really inspiring to me to, as you told the story and you could watch what you just described, his movement from biomedical doc to healing doc.
Yeah.
Very impressive.
Yeah.
So now, I mean, you've spent a lot of time with this book. A couple years, 3 years,
Mm-hmm.
more
2.5.
maybe.
Yeah.
So you're still making a contribution, and I'm hoping we can get word out about this book so that people will want to buy it and get in touch with that pioneering spirit that I think was so much evident among the founders that I knew.
Yes. Yeah. He knew of those people. He'd read their stuff, but he wasn't a joiner. He didn't hardly leave home. He took care of his patients and his family. But I wanted the name of family doctor on the front. I still have people, when they ask me what kind of specialty I was in, I say I was a family doctor. And they said, "Oh, a general practitioner, huh?" And I said, "No, a family doctor." Family medicine has existed since 1968. General practitioners stopped in 1968. But if people don't know that, and I think it is the most important, it's the most important doctor. And of course, it's self-serving of me to say that. But when I watch people, including now that I'm retired, they need family doctors. They don't need everything else all the time. They need them occasionally, but they need a family doctor a lot.
Absolutely. So I'm just going to ask you one final question. What's your thoughts about Dr. Buker and his family? I mean, the guy was, he was more than on call. He must have been away quite a bit.
Yes. Yeah, and you know, that's one of the areas that I really struggled with, because he would have all of his daughter's school events. I mean, I went to school for 12 years with his youngest daughter, He would frequently have to leave in the middle of a play, in the middle of a concert, in the middle of a debate. But he was always there, and he was there when she got home, and they had dinner together every night, even though it might be late. And he spent an inordinate amount of time with them on the weekends. I think the best sort of tell me that he did okay was a granddaughter that grew up 2,000 away in Massachusetts. And she said, you know, my grandfather, I was never close to him at night, but after the life that I spent with him, the many phone calls, the letters, the times we visited, the things we did together, the things that he wanted to do with me, he was a great grandfather, even though he was a long way apart. And I think a family doctor can be overly committed to their patients, and in many cases Richard was, but he was also a good father and a good husband and a good family man.
That's great. Well, I'm going to bring things to closure here. You want to show the book one more time? So,
yes, I'd love you to think about reading this book as you continue your family medicine education and your family medicine experience. Thank you for this time.
thank you, Larry, and it was great talking with you today.
And you.